After we buried the bodies, and I applied a magical bandage to my wound, it was a couple of hours into night. The cold air brought with it the frost, as fall really started to sink into the wasteland. I took a look over at the goods we scavenged before convincing the others it would be a smart idea to head to the pool, a nearby settlement built into an old chemical manufacturing plant. The city of about 100 ponies or so was mainly built out of a set of drug manufacturing labs and surplus chemical storehouses surrounded by a line of makeshift concrete rubble walls. The whole place was one accident away from being one big, tainted-filled crater in the middle of nowhere. Sky and I normally rented a room from the only hotel that wasn't also a brothel or drug hangout, staying there wherever we headed through our southwest trade route. Years ago, its owner had chartered to travel with us there, from the ruins of Trottingham, so we got to know the stallion quite well. I still normally slip him something neat or quirky I found as extra incentive to keep the drug pushers away from us. But with recent events keeping me light on the saddlebags, I was hoping that I could still convince him to help me out as a favor for a friend. If worse came to worse, he wasn't the only friend I've made there. As the marauder once again chirped along the ruined highway at a good pace, I relaxed again. The constant drum of the engine helped me refocus, reminding me that we still needed to stay diligent for when or where 42 would pop up next. I still needed to find where Twilight had the magic pond water moved to, and the only clue I had was what the little filly Pinky told me in my dream. I scrunched up my muzzle tightly. What sort of clue was, it's the only place you can normally go to find it, anyways. The floodlights on the large factory rose out of the night. The 4 large cylindrical storage tanks stood as monoliths against the sheer rock face that seemed to reach halfway up the side of Full Mountain as the enormous peak disappeared above the cloud layer. As we grew closer, I could see the light peeking from the various holes rusted in the side of the structures. The makeshift steel-sheeted apartments of the residents set inside the drum exposed themselves to the elements. I could see a number of the assorted brightly lit smaller buildings where most of the actual drug manufacturing took place. All of them sat dangerously close to a single concrete reservoir that the 4 large storage tanks drained into after the war. This created a small lake of nearly pure taint that sat against the jagged cliff face of the mountain. The serene calmness of the rainbow liquid always disturbed me. I slowed down and flepped on the high beams as I approached the ridge running over the Rainland River, dropping the car into neutral as I stopped just short of a dismissive single-pony guardhouse with a familiar-looking black-coated Pegasus stallion. The white of his short-cut mane and wide green eyes were normally the only thing I could see in the darkness, but 500 lumen headlights seemed to help with that. I leaned my head out the window and smiled brightly at him. He beamed a wide smile back as he trotted over eagerly. "What did I tell you, dipstick?" I said happily, pouring on the Pride as I gunned the engine, letting its deep roar fill the night air for a few seconds before letting her drop down to a low idle. "I told you I'd get it running." "Well, I'll be backlash. You finally up and did it." His thick country accent was just as hard to understand as ever. "Would have never had the thought I'd see the day when you finally drove her down here. I guess I'll be owing you that beer after all. It'll only be a few hours till I'm off. Could meet you down at Tanker, then." "Yeah, sounds good to me. My friends and I just have to get set up with a room at Lanterns. Then we can talk as long as you're buying." I smiled and nodded towards my unhappy traveling companions. "Is the fee to enter still 5 caps?" He shook his head with a frown. "Nah, they up and raised the damned thing to 20 caps. Sorry about that. Thing is, that a scrap in between them big shots what run the place. So that dissuaded poor newcomers from joining the fight. They've done raised the price." "It's fine," I said with a soft sigh. "I'm a little light on caps. Got plenty of guns to sell, but no real money. Think you can spot me until I can trade some of this stuff?" I gave him my best pleading eyes, whimpering slightly. "Nuh-uh. I can't let you all in if you ain't gonna pay." he said as he stomped his hoof, stiffening up and glaring down at me. I looked up as his mouth slowly curled into a smile, and he started to laugh. Nah, you know I couldn't refuse you. Go on in, and I'll see y'all in a bit. I nodded and shifted back into drive, pulling onto the bridge slowly, listening to the old rhythm of the tires playing on the worn boards as they sounded of the running river below mixed in. I looked over the main strip ahead. The floodlights from the top of each large tower filled every nook and cranny of the town, revealing every pony clearly as they moved from one brothel or bar to another. A small group of ponies were dancing around a large bonfire as an orange-coated pony played energetically on a fiddle, the sounds of laughter and good times carrying in the air. I've only heard about this place, Longbow said, as she looked over the bright and lively street, shifting herself uneasily. The population is less shady than I expected. Carlotta choked back for a moment before yelling and bursting out into laughter, causing the armored pony to tense up momentarily. I couldn't help but join in, giggling as Longbow canted her head and glared between us. I don't under... She paused for a moment, before she faced Hoof with a smirk. That's not what I meant. Oh, Celestia, you're too good, I said, as I gasped between laughs, pulling the Marauder over to the side of the road and onto the small paved lot the makeshift Red Lantern motel was set up in. The glowing neon picture of a red lantern, the only distinct feature of the pale brown building. You know, some of you Steel Rangers are all right. I cut the car off and popped the hood, not looking as I swung the driver's side door open, nearly hitting a small, white-coated young stallion who was walking by. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there, I grunted, as I choked back the rest of my laughs, shutting the door as I got out. The stallion, who must have only been a couple of years older than Brass, glared up at me, his greasy and short, pale yellow mane blowing softly in the wind. You on a mission from Celestia? He squinted his pale green eyes and leaned in towards me menacingly. Unless you are, watch where you're going next time, dick. He chuckled to himself and continued on his way, trotting towards the motel. The odd feint of foul chemicals following in his wake. I looked back over at Carlotta and Longbow, giving them a shrug before I lifted the hood of the Marauder, starting to disconnect the spark battery controller. How do you know the pony's here? I thought you didn't sell drugs, Carlotta said with a raised eyebrow, her blue plumage brighter than ever in the artificial sunlight from above. That being true, I do sell lots of other goods used to make drugs, I stated plainly, as I rummaged around my saddlebags for a wrench. It's not nearly as much as I normally make off of things like guns and ammo, but there's a lot of stuff out there that can be repurposed for use here, and they're always willing to buy. So it works out for us. I yanked the wrench with my hooves, finally dislodging the connector and freeing the hoof-sized, gem-studded silver box. Not to mention, the stallion who owns this place came over with us from Trottingham and has been nice enough to accommodate us on our journey back and forth. So, why not make a few extra caps while we're here? As I placed the Arcanotech drive in my saddlebags and shut the hood, a familiar Pegasus walked over from the manager's office. Backlash, my old chum. It's been too long. My ears perked with his accented voice as I spun to meet him, only to have his hooves pull me against his chest and hug me far too tightly. A few of my vertebrae popped loudly for a moment, giving me the sense he needed to stop as he let go. I hope that moron wasn't too terribly rude to you, but don't mind him. He's a bit of a odd fellow. I flopped to the ground with a thud and looked up at him. His olive-drab coat seemed fairer under the bright lights of the tower, contrasting with the dark brand on his flank. The brownish black of the clouds with the lighting bolt struck out like a sore thumb on him. I reached my hoof up as he took it and helped me back up, allowing me to dust myself off as he took off his hat, running his hoof through the white mohawk he called a mane. I wouldn't have made the same choice in style, but to each their own. Yeah, I think I'll live, I said with a soft smile, letting Carlotta and Longbow walk up beside me. It's been a while, Ripcord. How's business been? He let out a soft sigh and let his silver eyes sink. Well, you see, Between the growing fuss of the three kings' rivalries and the rate hike for entering, I dare say they're slowly driving me out of business. You're the first paying customer I've seen in the last month. Well, aside from that moron fellow. He grumbled as he looked over at the room the small stallion went into. Longbow stomped her hoof and pointed over to the same room. Even if he's impolite, you shouldn't demean your customers with such insults. Ripcord gave me a look of disbelief. You would dare accuse me of such slander? He put his tan safari cap back on before smiling. The young stallion's name is Moron. He signed it in the lookbook, you see. Although he is rather fond of insisting that it's pronounced Myron. I don't really care for either pronunciation, mind you, but one would think you would just sign your name as Myron if you thought it would be proper for others to call you by it. He turned his gaze to me and pointed a hoof at the room next to the office. You may have your usual room, but I'm terribly sorry I'm going to have to be charging you twice the standard rate. You do understand how business gets. I sighed and nodded. I just have to get some goods turned into actual caps first. Then, I'll be right back to pay you. Turning, I froze for a moment before looking back at him with a sly smile. You wouldn't mind keeping our normal arrangement, since I'll be paying double, would you? The green Pegasus rolled his eyes and nodded. I simply cannot see any reason why I should refuse a dear friend. Very well, then. He eyed over the gleaming armored longbow was wearing. Just do be sure to keep your companions out of trouble, he said, with a forced smile before glancing around. Say, where is Miss Skyline? I do wish to say hello at least before you take off once more. She's back at the garage, loading the fort down. I'll be sure to tell her you said hello, I said, as I nodded for Carlotta to follow. Longbow, stay out here for a while I sort this out. Try not to run off into any more gun battles, I finished, as we walked away, getting a sigh from the paladin as we rounded the corner back to the main street. I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have been, and almost ran into a pony who was dancing into the music down the street, causing me to look around in confusion at the new mobs of ponies who filled the streets, as if coming out of nowhere to get their party on all at once. The two of us wound our way along the lively street, heading around in between two of the nearest towers. The lower 20 feet of the furthest of the two had rusted out, leaving a large gap with just support beams to hold it up. The many tables that took over nearly the entire ground floor of the building, along with their bar built across the back wall, were the only refuge from the brilliant light shone above. Two wide staircases disappeared up onto the sheet metal floor of the apartment section of the tower. A silver-colored curved sheet of metal hung by a chain off the middle of the gap. The words "Tanker" emblazoned in orange seemed to sparkle in the bright lights while it swung in the breeze. A single dark brown earth pony mare was scrubbing the bar with a rag as we walked in. Her bright red mane hung off heavily, reminding me of Pinky's mane when she was depressed. What can I get you this evening? She spoke out with a sigh, not even gazing up at us. I'm here to dump some gear on you, Miss Schnapps. I sat down on one of the bar stools as I spoke, straightening my vest just as she stopped wiping and looked up in momentary shock, anger quickly replaced on her face. Get out, she said in a low tone, leaning forward on the bar. Hey, I just want to do business, then I'll be out of your mane, I said as I raised my hooves defensively, watching the seething hate bubbling in her eyes. You see, Peppermint Schnapps here was Skyline's last mare friend, and they got into a good run at relationships for a year or so. They were happy, but only up to the point when Schnapps wanted to get away from the pool to start over somewhere new. Skyline wouldn't leave me to run off with her, and ultimately chose to end it with Peppermint instead, so I understand why she holds me to a bit of a grudge. She leaned forward on the countertop, the soft click of the 22-gauge lever-action shotgun I had sold her emitting from under the countertop, loud enough to get Carlotta's attention. Fine, but make it quick. What do you have? A 308 sniper rifle, two 10mm machine guns, and a single 12.7 submachine gun, in bad condition. I'll take 1,000 caps for the lot. I stared into her dark eyes as I listed them off, trying my best to be intimidating. I'll give you 500 for the caps. She snapped back, locking her eyes to mine. The rifle alone's worth that, I said as I put my hooves on the bar and leaned in towards her. Make a better offer. The rifle's only worth 500 if it works, she said as she glared and tensed up. 700 for all of them. Her eye twitched as she finished, letting me know she really couldn't go much higher, and already needed a good deal. But she also knows that I don't cheat customers. Well, fuck that. After the last 2 weeks, I needed a win. I brushed my vest out of the way, showing off my bandaged chest. It works. I'm only around because I have the best barding money can buy. I narrowed my eyes and huffed out. 800 caps, plus 4 beers, then I'll leave. Fine. She leaned back from the bar and mumbled to herself as she went off to her safe upstairs in her storeroom. What's her deal? Carlotta said with a smirk, hoisting the guns from the raiders on top of the bar. Were you two a fling? She gasped loudly. Did you cheat on her with something? I gasped back in mock shock, doing my best to try and look hurt before she frowned at me. No, I got between her and her plans with Skyline. I shrugged and slumped on the counter. Crazy bitch wanted to leave Equestria for some reason, to go run off to the zebra lands no less. I mean, life here is tough and all, but that's just suicide. Carlotta finished placing the guns on the counter and wrapped her claws loudly next to my muzzle. You would never come between Sky and me if I wanted to take her away, would you? Hell no. Sky can do what she wants. She was the one who didn't want to leave me behind. I drug my forehooves around the bar top with a sigh. Plus, I'm not nearly crazy enough to think that I can take you on. It's good you know your limits. Carlotta chuckled and pat me on the back softly. Although Sky keeps smashing mine with how she... La 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 la, I can't hear you. I tried to stuff my hooves in my ears. My sister's love life is not something I ever needed to hear. I noticed Carlotta stiffen up, hearing Peppermint come back down the stairs as I put my hooves back to the bar. Peppermint returned from the upstairs with a small pouch in her mouth, swinging her head and tossing it to me. I went to grab it and missed, the bag of the small metal cap smacking into my face with a loud jiggle. I reached up and rubbed my nose as I got to my hooves. Thanks. You can hand her the beers. I nodded over to Carlotta, who now had her stone-cold killer expression trained on the brown mare. I turned slowly to walk out after placing the pouch of caps in my saddlebags, pausing for a moment as I looked back. Don't worry. I'll be sure to tell Sky you said hello. As we walked back to the bustling street, I heard her slam something glass on the floor with a curse that bled off into the noise of the ongoing party. I felt wrong to cheat her out of a few caps, and had I shown up a few weeks ago, I may have given her a good deal on those guns, maybe even tried to patch things up. As we walked back up the street, my thoughts snapped back to earlier that day, watching as Harmony died in front of me. My brain was replaying when she said I had given her hope. I don't see it. Hope can't be given to anyone. You can't give anyone anger or sadness. You just share those emotions with them. But I'm pretty sure that's not giving it. The only hope I can call my own is the hope that I can send 42 from this world and somehow find a way to atone for all the suffering that I've caused. As we rounded the corner back towards the manager's office, I was caught off guard to see Longbow standing faced away from Myron's door. She reared up and bucked hard, splitting the door in half before turning to enter. I bolted past Ripcord office, galloping as fast as I could, as I heard the sharp report of gunshots, too small to be the rifles from her suit. I tripped on my weak hoof. Honestly, I was getting surprised that I made it this far on it, as it finally gave out under me, and ended up sliding painfully along the asphalt. I climbed my hooves as I heard the shuffling of the open room before another loud shot. Oh, fuck! Is that my blood? The voice of the young stallion yelled out as I scrambled to the door, looking in to see a stub-nose .32 caliber revolver floating in Longbow's levitation, and Myron on the floor with a bleeding hole in his flank. You shot me, you bitch! I looked around for a moment, noticing dimly lit room housed a pantheon of laboratory equipment, a pair of terminals, and a few enchanted pressure vessels. Half-empty cartons of cleaner and jugs of various chemicals were strewn on the floor, haphazardly, with only a narrow path of carpet left open between all the junk. A box labeled "empty" was stuffed full of vials of dash, next to one of the machines that had a pair of red vials hooked into them. "You are manufacturing illegal substances. I'm placing you under arrest with the authority given to me by the Ministry of Wartime Technology." Longbow's voice was calm and unwavering, and she levied both her rifles at him, tossing the revolver from her grip towards the door. "Longbow, you can't just arrest someone here." I walked up slowly behind her, favoring my aching hoof as I pushed through the clutter. "Look, you follow me. You listen to my orders." I looked down at Myron's hate-filled eyes as the blue unicorn turned slowly. "I was assigned to lead you to the facility, not the other way around." Her voice turned cold as she stared at me with one eye. "I will bring him to justice. It's my duty." I heard Carlotta step up behind me. The clack of the autoloaders on her battle saddle made me cringe and turn. "If that's what you came for, you can go home. Backlash doesn't need your help." Carlotta pushed past me roughly, causing me to lose my balance and fall into a pile of empty boxes. "Stay or go. Either way, I'm going to need you to step away from my employer." Myron smiled up from the floor as he put pressure on his wounded rump. "About time you showed up, Carlotta." Level up. +5 barter, +5 melee weapons, +5 big guns. Perk. Light Traveler. You've gotten so used to traveling with only the necessities that if you're carrying under 30 total pounds of weight, you gain an extra point of agility. Be careful when weighing yourself down. Go over 30 points. It also reduces your agility by 1 point. It cannot be taken along with the Smart Packer perk. Quest perk. Wasteland Crusader. Your exploits are being rebroadcast on separate radio frequencies around and even outside of Equestria. New dialogue options are available when speaking to any pony with a current position of power.